So in this video we're going to go through line traces, also known as raycasting. But before we get into that, we're first going to look into object types and trace channels. What we've got in this scene, which I've just taken from the meshes folder and dropped in, scaled and rotate them, are three different static meshes. Okay, so we've got this target, we've got a door, and then we've gotten this wooden block. And if we look at this, if we go down to the settings or details for each one of these, you'll notice that under collision, it's using collision presets, which is just called default. So if I open up my target, just double click it in my content browser, it'll open up like the target window. And in here, it'll show me what that default is, okay? So it's just called collision preset is block all, and the object type is world static. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these three, okay, and I'm just going to turn them to block all. So that's block all, that should be block all, and this here one should also be block all. And you can see that the three of them, when I'm clicking through, they're all object types world static. Now if you wanted to add in or change the object type for any of these, you can easily do that by just changing block all to custom. And then you probably by default have around 6 object types set up by the engine. World static, world dynamic, pawn, physics body, vehicle, and destructible. And below that it shows you the kind of collision response you're going to get with other types of objects that are going to be in the world. So for instance, if this here target, which is an object type world static, was to come into contact with any other object in the game, it would just block it. And that's the same for the rest. But for instance, if I wanted this object not to block the pawn, for instance, I can tell it to just overlap with it or to ignore it altogether. So if I press play now, I should be able to walk through this, which I can do. And then if I change that back to block, press play, it will block my path. So every object that you have in your scene, and when you're creating blueprints, you can give them like a specific unique collision preset and object type if you wanted to, just so that they interact with objects differently in your scene. So for instance, remember I had in a previous one this switch box. I could set, if I select a box in that, the collision type is set to overlap all dynamic. I could set that to custom, and I could set it to ignore everything but to overlap with a pawn. So that means that if the player is the only object in your scene that's set to a pawn, then it's the only one that's going to be able to interact with that box. So how does this come into play with line tracing? Well, if we open up our character blueprint, what we can do is I can show you the 3 different nodes that you can use for line tracing. So if I right click and type in line, the 3 main ones would be line trace for objects, and they're all going to look very, very similar. Line trace by channel, well, that's a multi-line trace. Line trace by channel and multi-line trace by channel, or this one can also be an object. So basically what we have here is a way to draw out a single line, and if it comes into contact with something, we can gather details from that object that it hit. Now the line trace for objects is something that interacts with the object type. So remember, each one of these objects, if we go into the collision, has an object type. But we also have a trace response here as well. And that is where the line trace, I've gotten the wrong one. That is where the line trace by channel comes in. So we've got visibility in camera. If we look at our objects, we've got visibility in camera. So in our first person character, what we could do is we could set off a line trace and tell it to only interact with certain object types. Maybe if we set up one that's called door. So if we hit a door, maybe it opens that door. The start and end, this is where your line trace starts and this is where it ends, and you can denote and specify how long your line is. Object types is the types of objects that it's going to interact with. Trace complex means that if you have an overly complex model that has a really complex collision box or collision system around it, you can tell it to use that one rather than a default simplified one. Actors to ignore, this could be a list of actors that you want the line trace to ignore. Draw debug type is whether if we're going to draw the line in the game, so basically if we're going to see it. If you're shipping your game, you're obviously not, you probably don't want to see this line, but for debug purposes it's definitely a good idea to turn this on to start off with. And ignore self. Sometimes you're going to be starting this line trace within an actor or within an object, so you probably want to ignore that object if you can. And if we click on these arrows, we can specify what kind of color the line trace is going to be and how long it's going to draw. The channel is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is instead of object types, you're going to have trace channel. And again, there's only two there at the minute. For multi, it's exactly the same, but what you can do is, if you look here, our output is a single variable, but in the multi one it is an array, which means that you can hit multiple objects with one trace using this one. This one you probably wouldn't use too much. Maybe if you want to shoot through doors, so you can shoot through a door and hit an object behind it, you can use it that way. So what we're going to do is we'll probably use line trace for objects to start off with, and then we'll plug in line trace by channel as well. So if you've watched my previous video, you've probably noticed that we've got this spawn actor projectile. We're just going to get rid of that, but we're going to keep in the reference to the muzzle because this is going to be our starting position for our line trace. So every time we use rapid fire now, it's not going to shoot out a projectile, it's going to shoot out a line, and then we can do different things with that. So with our muzzle reference, remember, which is just this arrow, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull out from that and type in get location. So I just want to get the location, and where location's fine, and that's going to plug straight into our start. Okay, so that's where our line trace is going to start. Then we kind of want to have a direction. Okay, so what direction is it going to go? What we can do is, if we pull out from the muzzle again, type in forward, we can get what's called a forward vector. There are different types of vectors that you can get. So for instance, a forward vector would just go forward. You can get a back vector, an up vector, left vector. But for this here, the forward vector is just denoting that we're looking for the forward line of the muzzle. We want to get a length for this, so we're going to multiply this. So remember, like Shift 8, and we're going to multiply it by a float. So maybe if I put in 1,000, which would be 10 meters long. And then what we need to do is, for the end, we need to actually combine the start and the end length together and plug it into the end. So if we pull out from this one and hit the plus key, we get a vector plus vector. If we plug these in together and then plug that into the end, and we can test this out straight away. Okay, so if I draw debug type and just set for duration, which is 5 seconds, compile it. Oh, we will get an error actually, sorry, we haven't set the object types. So what we want to do, the easiest way to do this is just to right click on this and promote to variable, and we'll just name this object types. So this is a specific enum variable, and it's an array, which means it can hold several different types of objects in it. So if I go to array elements and hit on the plus, and these here were all world static, so I'm just going to leave them at world static and hit compile. So if I press play now and hit down, you'll see that as I move along that it's hitting, or it's shooting out these ray traces or line traces. You'll notice that it doesn't seem to be coming into contact with anything, but remember the world or the object type was set to world static, and our objects here are world static, and you can see we're getting a different result. The squares there that you're seeing, that's the hit result, okay? And if we look behind there, you're seeing a green line. That just means that that line has gone through an object of that type that we specified. So that is the line trace working for objects. And again, I could come into this object types, add in a different, so pawn or world dynamic, which I think the floor is. So now if I press play and shoot the floor, it is hitting the floor. And what can we do with this? Well, at the end here we've got this out hit, okay? And what I like to do is just right click on that and split a struct. So this is a struct which just contains different types of variables. So if I open that up, we've got loads of different information that we can gather from that one hit, okay, of the line trace. So we can say, you know, has the out hit blocked anything? Has it overlapped with anything? You know, its location, the object that it's hit, and you know, we can also get the start trace and the end trace that we've plugged in here at the beginning of this. So for instance, what we could do is with our out hit actor, we can say destroy actor, and at the minute it'll destroy itself, which means it'll destroy the character. But if we plug this out hit actor in here, it should destroy whatever actor we hit. So if I shoot the roof, it'll disappear, that'll disappear. And basically as we shoot these rays across, it's going to make everything disappear. Another thing that we could do is we could bring in our light. So if I go to blueprints and I put in light BP, what I'm going to do is with that light BP, I'm just going to go into the viewport and I'm going to add in a cube. Okay, so this is just something for us to aim at and visibly see in the game. What I'm going to do is the collision type for this, it's something that we don't have yet. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to make an object type called light, and the way to do that is if we go to settings and if we go to project settings, there'll be a section called collision. At the minute we've just got all these presets that we've seen before. Okay, so it's just showing the presets and whatever way they're set up as well. But at the top we've got object channels and trace channels, and we can create a new object channel. So for instance, default name, I'll just put in light. Response, we'll put in overlap. Or no, we'll put in block. Yeah. Okay, and accept that. So if we go here now, we should be able to see. Oh, there it is. We've got our light one. Okay. So now, if I go to this light, click on the cube, go to collision, and set this to light, that means that object type is now of a light. I can save that. If I go back to my first person character, object types, I'm just going to delete this one and I'm just going to make it interact with the light. So let's test that out. It should make it disappear. Yeah. But remember, our light has a function in it called light switch, which means that it's going to lower the intensity and set the color over time. So what we can do is, in our character, we can get the class, ask if that is equal to the light BP. So just type in light and search for it, light BP. I'm going to delete this destroy actor. And we're going to pull out from this and type in branch. So if it's true, we're going to cast to light BP. And again, remember, there could be loads of different light BPs in our scene, so we need to know the specific one that we hit. And of course, we've got this out hit actor. So this is going to be the light that we've hit, and this is going to make the change. And that light BP has a custom event called light switch. So if we type in light switch, it should run that event. Okay. So what this is doing is it's just checking if it's the light BP that it hit. Okay. If it is the light BP that it hit, it's going to cast to the light BP class, and it's going to use this object, okay, or actor that we've hit, and then it's going to run this event. So if I compile and save that, press play, it shouldn't delete it now. Okay. You can see there it's not hitting anything, it don't have those squares, but if we hit the light, you can see that it's changing color. So that's a line trace for objects. Line trace for channel is exactly the same, but it doesn't interact with the object type. It interacts with the trace channel. So this light PP has a, if I click on the cube for it, it has a trace channel that it will block the camera and visibility, so it will block both. But if I change the visibility to ignore, and what I'm going to have to do is just delete this and plug these back in. So for duration, we don't need the object types, but I'll just keep that there. Out hit, we right click and split the struct, and then the out hit actor goes in there, and it also goes into our cast. So now it's only going to hit a light that has the trace channel visibility set to block. So if I duplicate this and move it down here, oh, actually don't duplicate that. Duplicate this, and I'm going to just delete the rest of my lights so we can see this better. So I'm going to set one cube to ignore visibility but block camera, and I'm going to set this here one to block visibility and ignore camera. So just to make sure they're set up correctly. Yeah. So if we go back to our first person character, it's going to trace for visibility. If it hits that and it's a light BP, then it's going to change that light setting or run that event. So you can see there that it's not hitting that one. I've just walked into the box, but if we click on this one, you can see that it's the gun that's changed it. And if we go back and we change this trace channel to camera, compile and save, then this here one won't work, but this one will. And just like object types, you can go into your project settings, engine collision, and you can set up new trace channels if you wanted to. so your objects can have specific trace channels.